The lake party fiasco. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Daniel Harper jolted awake, his ears assaulted by a cacophony of noise that didn't belong on his quiet farmland. Laughter, shrill and unrestrained, cut through the stillness, accompanied by the thumping bass of pop music and the unmistakable splash of water. For a fleeting moment, he thought he was still tangled in some bizarre dream, his mind conjuring chaos where there should have been peace. But as the sounds grew louder, more insistent, reality sank in like a stone in his gut. This wasn't a dream. It was coming from his lake, his private lake, a sanctuary no one was supposed to disturb. Daniel threw back the quilt, his bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor of his bedroom. He didn't bother with a shirt, just yanked on a pair of worn jeans and his muddy work boots, the laces left untied in his haste. His heart pounded with a mix of confusion and rising anger as he stormed out the back door, the screen slamming shut behind him. The crisp March air hit his face, but it did little to cool the heat building in his chest. His farm stretched out before him, acres of rolling fields and dense woods, and at its heart lay the lake, a shimmering, secluded jewel he'd fought hard to keep untouched. It was his refuge, a place where the world's noise couldn't reach. Until now. As he crested the small hill that overlooked the water, his breath caught in his throat. The sight was so absurd, so utterly out of place, that his jaw dropped. There, floating on his pristine lake, was a full-blown party. Inflatable swans and unicorns bobbed lazily across the surface, their garish colors clashing with the natural greens and blues. Half-submerged coolers leaked ice into the water, and at least 24 strangers, people he'd never seen in his life, were swimming, laughing, and clinking glasses like they were at some exclusive resort. A massive Bluetooth speaker perched on the dock blasted music so loud it drowned out the birds that usually filled the trees with their morning chorus. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing to process the scene. How had this happened? His property was miles from town, surrounded by thick woods and a single dirt road with a rusted gate he kept locked. There were private property signs posted every 50 yards, faded, sure, but still legible. Who were these people? Who had let them in? And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, she appeared. A woman strutted toward him, her platinum blonde hair glinting in the sunlight, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose like a crown. She carried herself with an air of entitlement so thick you could choke on it, her wide-brimmed sun hat flopping dramatically with each step. Her expensive swimsuit hugged her frame, and in her hand, she held a mimosa, the orange liquid sloshing slightly as she moved. She took a slow, deliberate sip, barely glancing at Daniel before smirking like he was the intruder. "Oh, hey there," she said, her voice dripping with casual indifference. She waved a manicured hand, as if dismissing a waiter. "Didn't see you there, farm boy." Farm boy. The words hit him like a slap, and his patience, already stretched thin, teetered on the edge of collapse. He took a deep breath, his fists clenching at his sides. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the music. She blinked at him, her expression blank, as if he'd asked her to explain the theory of relativity. "Oh, we're just having a little pool party," she said, tilting her head. "You don't mind, do you? It's such a beautiful lake, and it was just sitting here all empty." She gestured toward the water with a flourish, like she was some kind of environmentalist doing him a favor by occupying his land. Daniel stared at her, stunned into silence. Was she serious? This wasn't some public pool or a community park. This was his property, private, paid for, sacred. "This is private property," he said, his tone low and dangerous. "You and your friends need to leave. Now." She laughed, a sharp, grating sound that made his teeth grind, then turned to her group of oblivious partygoers. "Hey guys," she shouted, her voice carrying over the water. "The owner's here. He wants us to leave." A few people groaned, some rolled their eyes, and one guy in a neon green Speedo actually booed, like Daniel was crashing their Broadway debut. "Oh, relax," the woman said, flipping her hair with a practiced flick. "We're not hurting anyone. You've got all this space, and you never even use it. It's just water, for heaven's sake." She smirked again, and Daniel caught her name as one of her friends called out. "Chill out. Vanessa." "Vanessa. Of course her name was Vanessa. His blood pressure spiked, a dull throb starting at his temples. That's not the point, he snapped. You broke onto my property, threw a damn festival in my lake, and now you're acting like I'm the one being unreasonable. Vanessa sighed dramatically, as if he were some cranky old man yelling at kids on his lawn. Look, you can join if you want, she offered, flashing a grin like she was doing him a grand favor. We've got extra drinks, and my friend makes a mean margarita. Daniel's eyes darted past her to the mess they'd already made. Empty beer bottles and snack wrappers floated near the shore, aluminum cans glinted on the grass, and someone had set up a rickety grill dangerously close to his wooden dock. He took a step forward, lowering his voice to a growl. You have exactly 5 minutes to pack up and get out of here before I start calling the cops. Her expression shifted in an instant. The fake smile vanished, replaced by an irritated sneer. Seriously? You're going to be that guy, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. It's just a little party. You wouldn't even know we were here if you weren't so nosy. Nosy? He repeated, incredulous. On my own land. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to take another deep breath before he said something he'd regret. I don't care what kind of party this is. You're trespassing. Leave. Now. Vanessa scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard he was surprised they didn't pop out. You're such a buzzkill, she muttered. No wonder you live out here, all alone. A few of her friends snickered, and that was it, the final straw. These people weren't going to leave willingly. Fine. If they wanted a party, he'd give them one they'd never forget. Without another word, Daniel turned on his heel and marched back toward the house, ignoring Vanessa's smug laughter trailing behind him. She thought she'd won, thought he was just some bitter farmer who'd grumble and do nothing. She had no idea who she was dealing with. By the time he reached the barn, his mind was already spinning with ideas. Calling the cops would work, sure, but it'd take too long, and frankly, he wanted Vanessa to suffer a lesson she'd carry with her. He needed something big, something unforgettable. That's when his eyes landed on it. A dusty wooden box tucked in the corner, a relic from an old prank war with his cousin, Tommy. He strode over, flipped open the lid, and grinned as he pulled out a fistful of incredibly realistic rubber snakes. Oh, this was going to be fun. Daniel hefted the box of rubber snakes onto his workbench, the faint musty smell of storage wafting up as he sorted through them. There were dozens, some small and coiled, others long and sinuous, their painted scales glinting in the dim barn light. A few were remote-controlled, leftovers from a fishing trip where he'd terrorized Tommy so badly the poor guy had sworn off boats for a month. Daniel chuckled at the memory, his fingers brushing over the biggest one, a thick, menacing water moccasin replica with a motorized tail that slithered through water like the real thing. Perfect. He grabbed his phone from his pocket and dialed his best friend, Ethan, a man whose knack for mischief rivaled his own. The line rang twice before Ethan's gravelly voice came through. What's up, Dan? You sound like you're plotting something. How fast can you get to my place? Daniel asked, skipping the pleasantries. Ethan paused. What did Vanessa do this time? Daniel smirked, though there was no humor in it. Threw a pool party in my lake. A beat of silence, then a low, rumbling chuckle. Oh, she messed up big time. What's the plan? I need your help with something, Daniel said, his grin widening. Bring your truck, and maybe some extra rope. On my way, Ethan replied, the excitement in his voice unmistakable. This is going to be good. While he waited, Daniel set to work. He dragged the box to the barn side door, where he had a clear view of the lake. The party was still in full swing. Vanessa lounging on a massive inflatable swan, sipping her drink like a queen, while her minions splashed and shouted around her. The sight fueled his determination. He started rigging the snakes, tying the static ones to fishing line so they'd float just beneath the surface of the inflatables. The remote-controlled ones he tested, their batteries still humming after years in storage. Each flick of a button sent them gliding smoothly across the barn floor, their movements eerily lifelike. Ethan's truck rumbled up the dirt road an hour later, kicking up dust as he parked beside the barn. He hopped out, a wiry man in his late 30s with a mop of dark hair and a perpetual grin that promised trouble. All right, let's see the damage, he said, peering toward the lake. His eyebrows shot up. Holy hell, Dan. That's a full-on circus down there. Tell me about it. Daniel muttered, handing him a rubber snake. Meet our secret weapon. Ethan took it, turning it over in his hands with a gleam in his eye. Oh, I like this. I like this a lot. What's the play? We're going to scare the living daylights out of them, Daniel said, laying out the plan. Tie these to their floats, set the remote ones loose in the water, and watch them scatter. Vanessa thinks she's untouchable. Let's prove her wrong. Ethan laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. You're a genius, man. A twisted, beautiful genius. Let's do it. They spent the next half hour prepping. Ethan climbed into the shallow end of the lake under the cover of a thicket, attaching the static snakes to the undersides of the inflatables while Daniel calibrated the remotes. They placed a few extra fakes near the shore, water moccasin lookalikes that bobbed menacingly in the reeds. By the time they were done, the lake looked unchanged to the untrained eye, but beneath the surface lurked a prank of epic proportions. Crouching behind a cluster of trees near the water's edge, Daniel and Ethan watched the party unfold. Vanessa was still perched on her swan, phone in one hand, drink in the other, snapping selfies with that same infuriating smirk. The music blared, laughter echoed, and the partygoers floated around like they owned the place. Daniel tightened his grip on the remote, his thumb hovering over the button. The first snake was positioned just under Vanessa's float, hidden by the gentle ripples. You sure about this? Ethan whispered, though his grin said he was all in. Absolutely, Daniel replied, his voice low. She thinks she runs this place. Let's give her a reason to run instead. With a subtle flick of his thumb, he pressed the button. The first scream pierced the air like a gunshot. It came from a woman lounging on a flamingo float, her drink splashing into the water as she shot upright, nearly tipping her raft. Oh my God, there's something in the lake, she shrieked, her voice high and panicked. A few heads turned, but most of the partygoers laughed it off. It's probably just a fish, a guy in a baseball cap said, taking a lazy sip of his beer. Daniel smirked, exchanging a glance with Ethan. Time for phase 2. He activated the second snake, a bigger, darker model that cut through the water toward a group splashing near the dock. One of them spotted it, froze, then let out a scream that could have shattered glass. Snake! There's a snake! Panic erupted like a wildfire. The once carefree swimmers scrambled onto floats, kicking wildly at the water, their drinks forgotten as they tried to escape the unseen threat. Vanessa, still lounging on her swan, rolled her eyes. Oh, please, she called out, her voice dripping with scorn. It's probably just a stick or something. Everyone calmed down. She took another sip of her mimosa, unfazed. Daniel grinned. She wanted to play tough? Fine. Time for the grand finale. He nodded at Ethan, who gave him a thumbs up. The static snakes tied beneath the floats began drifting to the surface, their coiled bodies glinting in the sunlight. Then Daniel pressed the button for the big one, the water moccasin replica, thick and coiling, slicing through the water straight toward Vanessa's swan. The moment she saw it, her smug facade cracked. Her body went rigid, her eyes widening in horror. Wait, what the? The snake brushed against her float, and she let out a scream so shrill it sent a flock of birds scattering from the trees. She flailed, paddle hands slapping the water, and in her panic, she threw herself off balance. Her drink flew one way, her sunglasses the other, and with a final, ear-piercing shriek, she tumbled backward into the lake. For a split second, everything went silent. Then chaos exploded. People screamed, thrashed, and clawed at each other to reach the shore. Inflatable rafts flipped, dumping more guests into the water. Someone tried to climb the dock, slipped, and crashed back in with a splash. Drinks, hats, and dignity went flying as the party disintegrated into a wet, panicked mess. Vanessa resurfaced, sputtering and flailing, her once perfect hair plastered to her face like seaweed. Get me out. Get me out right now, she screeched, splashing frantically. The rubber snakes bobbed around her, bumping her arms and legs, and in her mind, they were real, venomous, deadly, trapping her in a nightmare. Ethan bit down on his fist to stifle his laughter, tears streaming down his face. I can't. I just can't, he wheezed, doubling over. Daniel watched, a satisfied smirk tugging at his lips. It was better than he'd imagined. Vanessa's friends, realizing their fearless leader was just as terrified as they were, abandoned all pretense of loyalty. Some scrambled onto the dock, others swam for shore, but every single one of them was done with the lake. By the time Vanessa dragged herself onto dry land, she was a sodden mess, collapsing onto the grass with heaving breaths, her eyes darting around in terror. Daniel stepped forward then, making his presence known. She whipped her head around, fury blazing in her eyes. "You," she gasped, pointing a trembling finger. "You did this. You put snakes in your own lake." He crossed his arms, tilting his head. "Oh, I thought you said this was just a pool party. You weren't scared of a little water, were you?" Her mouth opened and closed, rage and humiliation warring within her. Around her, her friends muttered complaints, their glares shifting from Daniel to Vanessa. "You said this was your lake," one snapped. "You told us it was public property." Vanessa scrambled to her feet, her face flushing red. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know there were snakes?" "This is your fault," she spat at Daniel. He smirked, unfazed. "No, Vanessa, this is your fault. This is my land, my lake, and you just learned the hard way why you don't trespass where you're not wanted." Her nostrils flared, her hands balling into fists. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "I'll sue. I'll get the cops down here and tell them you tried to kill us." Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket, holding it up with a lazy grin. "Oh, don't worry. I already called them. They'll be here any minute." Her eyes widened, panic overtaking her anger. "Wait, you what?" Ethan burst out laughing, unable to hold it in any longer. "You seriously thought you could throw a party on someone else's property and then play the victim? Oh, this is gold." Vanessa spun around, realizing her friends were packing up, shooting her dirty looks as they dragged themselves toward their cars. Whatever hold she'd had over them was gone. They were wet, miserable, and furious, and they blamed her. The distant wail of sirens sealed her fate. Daniel took a deep breath, savoring the scent of lake water and sweet, sweet karma. "Next time, Vanessa," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Maybe ask permission before throwing a party. Trust me, this was the last one you'll ever have here." The flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff's car painted streaks across the lake's surface as it rolled to a stop, dust swirling in its wake. Vanessa, still dripping wet, stood frozen, her expression a mix of fury and dread. Her friends, or what was left of them, were either scrambling to gather their things or glaring at her with open resentment. The illusion of her authority had shattered the moment they realized she'd lied about the lake being public. Sheriff Monroe stepped out, a stocky man in his 50s with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor. He adjusted his belt, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. The scattered beer cans, the drenched partygoers, the inflatable chaos still floating on the water. His gaze landed on Daniel last, and he let out a long, tired sigh. "Jack," he said, rubbing his temple, "please tell me this isn't another one of those nonsense disputes." Daniel shrugged, hands in his pockets. "Wish I could, Sheriff. Came outside this morning and found an unauthorized party on my property. Asked them to leave. They refused." Monroe's gaze darkened as he turned to Vanessa, who straightened up, chin lifted like she still had some shred of control. "That true?" he asked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I was just hosting a small gathering. And this lunatic terrorized us. He threw rubber snakes in the lake to scare us half to death." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You threw a party on private property without permission, ignored the landowner's warning, and now you're upset because he pranked you?" Vanessa's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. "He traumatized me," she finally shrieked. "Do you have any idea what it's like to think you're about to be attacked by snakes? He should be arrested for psychological warfare or harassment." Monroe sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Vanessa, do you even hear yourself? I was the victim," she cried, stomping her foot in the mud, which only made her look more absurd. One of her soaked, shivering friends snapped. "Oh, shut up, Vanessa. You lied to us. You said this was a public lake, and now look at us. I lost my phone in the water. Greg twisted his ankle running from those stupid fake snakes. This is all your fault." More voices joined in, the group turning on her like a pack of wolves. "You told us it was fine. I'm never listening to you again. This is the worst day ever, and it's because of you." Vanessa's bravado crumbled under the onslaught, her eyes darting around as she realized she was losing them. The sheriff, done with the drama, raised a hand. All right, here's what's happening. Everyone who trespassed is getting a fine. You, he pointed at Vanessa, are getting an extra fine for organizing this mess. And since you made it, you're cleaning up every last can, every piece of garbage, and every floating cup before you leave. Vanessa gasped. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, Monroe replied, crossing his arms. Because if you don't, I'll add charges for littering too. She opened her mouth, probably ready to unleash another tirade, but one look at the sheriff's stony face made her snap it shut. With gritted teeth, she turned to the scattered remains of her party and stomped toward the shore, muttering curses under her breath. Daniel leaned against the porch railing with Ethan, watching the cleanup unfold like a live comedy show. Vanessa, still in her soggy swimsuit, trudged through the mud, picking up beer cans and crumpled paper plates. Her once pristine image was reduced to a bitter, humiliated wreck. Ethan chuckled. You ever seen her work so fast? Not like this, Daniel admitted, sipping a soda he'd grabbed from the house. But it's satisfying, isn't it? They watched as her friends bailed one by one, too embarrassed or fed up to stick around. By the time she finished, Vanessa was alone, knee-deep in regret and bad decisions. The sheriff gave her one last warning before driving off. I better not catch you near this property again. Next time, it won't just be fines. Exhausted and furious, Vanessa didn't argue. She stomped to her car, slammed the door, and peeled out, kicking up a cloud of dust. Silence settled over the lake at last. No music, no screeching, no intruders, just the wind in the trees and the gentle ripple of water. Ethan sighed, satisfied. Well, that was fun. More fun than it should have been, Daniel agreed. They lingered a moment longer, soaking in the aftermath of a lesson well taught. The next day, Daniel got to work. He installed new private property signs, bigger, bolder, impossible to miss. But the real masterpiece was a sign at the dirt road's entrance. Warning, lake infested with water snakes. Trespass at your own risk. He hammered it into place with a grin, knowing it'd do the trick. By the end of the week, rumors had spread like wildfire. Vanessa, still smarting from her humiliation, had apparently told everyone the lake was crawling with aggressive, mutant-sized water moccasins. The story grew wilder with each retelling. People in town started avoiding even driving past his property, whispering about the snake-infested death trap out on Harper's farm. Daniel didn't bother correcting them. Why would he? The prank had worked better than he'd dreamed. No more parties, no more intruders, and certainly no more Vanessas. Sitting on his porch that evening, soda in hand, he watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting golden ripples across his undisturbed lake. Peace at last. Best prank I ever pulled, he murmured to himself, raising his can in a silent toast to the chaos and the quiet it had bought him.